right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Museum of the Albemarle for today's History for Lunch presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started. For those of y'all who are here in the auditorium, we just ask that you please silence your cell phones. And for those of y'all on Zoom, please mute your microphone and then use the chat for your questions. We'll have a Q&A session, as always, for everyone at the end of the lecture. Also, a reminder that the next History for Lunch is scheduled for Wednesday, August 21st at noon, so next Wednesday. Chris Barber, who's a local author and historian, she'll provide insight into the complications of enforcing prohibition in a rural and remote area where liquor was transported by both boat and automobile, some of that along the Atlantic seaboard to Norfolk, Virginia, and beyond. She has a new book, so she'll be doing a book signing for that as well. Again, that's next Wednesday, the 21st at noon. So we hope you'll join us for her lecture. Now, today we welcome Brittany Proffitt. She is a sixth-year PhD candidate in Roman Archaeology at the University of Missouri-Columbia and a lab staff member at the Gabii Project excavation in Rome and the Venus Pompeiana Project. Awesome. That's at Pompeii. She'll be presenting an overview of the ongoing work that her team has been doing at the Temple of Venus in Pompeii, as well as the specific work that she's conducting on wall plaster fragments as part of her team's efforts to understand the construction phases of the temple complex. So please join us in welcoming Ms. Proffitt.
So can everybody hear me okay? Hello. Yeah, so as you heard, my name is Brittany. I am a PhD, I'm gonna stand right here. I'm a PhD student at the University of Missouri. Before I get into this, I do want to thank the museum director, Doug Pendergraph, and Lori Meads for kindly having me. I know I'm not the typical geographical area for the History for Lunch talks, but hopefully we'll still have fun. So today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the work my team is doing as part of the Venus Pompeiana Project. Before we get into that, though, I am going to give you just a very basic overview of Pompeii as a site and its history, and then a little bit more on the temple that we're actually working with. And then I'll, get in and show you some of our ongoing work and conclusions that we're drawing. So Pompeii, as you can see on sorry guys. As you can see on the map here, Pompeii is located in Campania in the Bay of Naples. It's near modern day Naples right here. It's to the south of Mount Vesuvius, the volcano. The city itself is built on top of a prehistoric lava flow, which basically means it's, kind of a sloping hill, except on one edge on the southwest side, it's a sheer cliff face drop. It's up visible to the entire valley that's to the south of it below. So it's and this will come back around as being important later, but it's about 50 meters from the Bay of Naples now. It used to be closer to the ocean, but the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius moved the coastline away and also moved away the Sarno River. So the number one thing people tell me when they go to Pompeii is, oh, I didn't realize how big it was. It's about 3 square kilometers. So, and I forgot to convert that into miles. So it's a sizable town. The exact population, we're guessing between 10 and 12,000. It's not entirely certain, partially because the entire city actually hasn't been dug out yet. As you'll see on this map, there's spaces that are completely blank. That's where we haven't excavated. So we're guessing at the population. So a very brief history of Pompeii. It's very old. It predated the Roman period, sometime between the 10th and 7th centuries BCE. And when I say BCE, that's short for before Common Era. And we use CE for Common Era as opposed to BC AD. That's just the standard vernacular in the archaeology. So if I say BCE, that's what I mean. So we know it was a small prehistoric settlement around, 900s BCE, somewhere in there to the 600s BCE. It was at this period one of the earliest temples here. I actually don't know who it was built to, but it was constructed sometime in that window. And then between the 8th and 6th centuries BCE, the Greeks settled the entire coastline of the Bay of Naples, Campania there. So we have a lot of Greek colonial influences coming in. They're mixing with the Etruscans, who are native people from up north in Rome. They start coming down. There's all this cross-cultural contact. And then a little bit after that, the Samnites come down from the east of Pompeii, from the mountains. They come in and they start actually like developing Pompeii more fully as a town. So Pompeii is primarily in its early phases a Samnite cultural center. It's got these other connections, it's very cosmopolitan influences happening as well, though. So, but generally speaking, Samnite, which means they had their own language, they had their own deities, they had their own cultural systems. Around the same time in the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, the Romans in Rome are starting to kind of expand through Italy. They're starting to move their way south. They're starting to move their way north. And my pointer. Oh yeah, of course. Sorry. So the real big date for Pompeii and the definitive dates for my team's work have to do with the Sullan conquest of Pompeii. So Sulla was a Roman general. The backstory isn't really necessary, but there was a bunch of conflict, and in 89 BCE, the Romans under Sulla conquer Pompeii. And actually, this photo is of some of the defensive walls of Pompeii that are still standing. These holes are from lead projectiles that would have been flung like with, what do you call them? Yeah, they would have been flung at the walls, and yeah. So you can still see evidence of this conquering. So between 89 and then 80 BCE, the Romans take over Pompeii. They establish themselves, they get all settled. They get all the Pompeian, Samnite resistance taken care of. In 80 BCE, Sulla founds a Roman colony, the Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum, at Pompeii. And what that means is, in this instance, to become a Roman colony meant that he was, symbolically rededicating this town, refounding the town. It's dedicated to Venus, Veneria, Venus Pompeianorum, Venus of Pompeii. So the government structures changed. You start seeing the integration of Roman political and religious buildings, temple styles, layouts, things like that. So, but the city is still primarily, culturally Samnite, starting to become Latin now too. The layout does some changing as well, but generally a lot of the things that were already there stay there still. And then, you have the transition to Rome becoming an empire instead of a republic. The big dates for the end of Pompeii, around 62 to 63 CE, so AD now, there was a massive earthquake that did a lot of damage across the entire region. And about, 17 years later in 79 CE is when Mount Vesuvius erupts. And I focused on this earthquake in particular because it plays a role in our temple ruins. There was a lot of damage done to the entirety of Pompeii by this earthquake. So since the damage was so extensive, since they didn't have, modern tools where you could make work go quickly, there were still active repairs happening all across the city, 17 years later, which is great for archaeologists because we can see things like, we'll get like little pots of pigment that were there to like repaint a wall and they got buried by the eruption. It's always fun when that happens. So the eruption. October 24th to 25th, 79 CE. It used to be accepted that it was August. There's a lot more evidence coming out now that it was October, and I'm happy to go further into that in the Q&A if you'd like. The eruption lasted about 18 hours, started around noon. It buried Pompeii over that time under about 6 to 7 meters of ash and pumice, superheated ash and pumice. So, everything up to second floors would have been buried. Things would have collapsed under their weight. Anybody trapped would have passed away. The complete death toll isn't actually certain. There's been about 1,500 individual skeletons found between Pompeii and Herculaneum, which is to the north, much closer to Mount Vesuvius. It also was incredibly deeply buried, more so than Pompeii. But a lot of the people survive. Just as a side note, a lot of people survived. So Pompey gets buried in 79. It's not immediately forgotten because there are so many survivors. They, move elsewhere in the Bay of Naples. We find, tombstones of their family names. So we know they moved. The government knew it was there. There were some immediate salvage operations to pull out like bronze sculptures and things. But after about a couple decades, the exact location of the city is lost. It becomes pretty much just farm fields for the next, 1,500, almost 1,600 years. It was first rediscovered, though, accidentally in 1594 by an architect, Domenico Fontana, who was digging a water canal for his ammunition factory near to Naples. Nothing came of this. They just said, okay, I guess it's there now. The actual official excavation process started in the mid-1750s under the Bourbonic kings of Naples. And to call it archaeology would be stretching it a little bit. It was more of a treasure hunting adventure, but it's resulted in a fantastic museum collection in Naples now, which if you're ever in Naples, I would go. It's awesome. So that's the basic background of Pompeii in 10 minutes or less. So the actual Temple of Venus. So I mentioned earlier that Pompeii is on this prehistoric lava flow, and that one portion, the southwest portion, is this cliff, and it's visible from the Bay of Naples to the west. Sorry, brain turned around. To the west, it's visible to the south in the valley below. So it's an incredibly important spot if you want to build something to, advertise a particular thing. So this is where the Temple of Venus is located. So when it was, fully built, it would have been visible from the ocean, it would have been visible from the valley. So this importance and visibility, it's kind of like how some cities now have regulations where you can't build a building past a certain height. It's that kind of a thing where you want to see that thing. So as part of the process of becoming a Roman colony, it was dedicated, the city was dedicated to Venus. So Pompeii and Venus become very closely tied together in terms of importance. She's the patron goddess of the city. And this is where we start getting a little bit into my team's work. It was generally accepted until recently that the temple was built under Sulla, so sometime between 89 and 80 BCE, on top of a pre-existing Samnite religious space. That's not atypical. The Romans are known to do that across the Mediterranean. They tend to just come in and reuse a space already, dedicated to a particular type of activity, or religious or commercial, and they just, put their god on top, and it works. So it's not a bad guess. The actual temple wasn't ever found. It was found in 1898. They finally figured out where it actually was in the city. We knew it existed since 1592 because there was an inscription that mentioned her, Venus Pompeiana. There she is again. But actually finding it was a problem. And it's actually right here. This is an older aerial photo, but this is the temple complex right here. And you can see it's a little hard to tell from this angle, but this is, a good 30 meters down. It's very visible even to this day. And on the left here is a layout my team has of the temple area as it's been excavated so far. So this was the common assumption. The version of the temple that's there, you can see a little smaller in the photo, that was built at the very end of Pompeii's life, right before the eruption, probably right after the earthquake. They would have started building this latest phase of it, and they didn't actually finish it before it all got buried. So when I talk about the temple being founded by Sulla, I'm referring to the earliest version of the Roman temple, if that makes sense. So we had the early one and then the last one, which is not the earliest. Sorry. Oh, there's better zoomed in. Yeah, so it's right here. And this, you can see this is the old, the latest version, the newest one that was buried by the eruption. And you can also see in this photo that the Temple of Venus, beyond being visible across, the entire countryside, it's also placed by one of the main gates into the city. It's next to a basilica, which is more of a law courts thing as opposed to like a modern basilica that's associated with religious practice. It's more of a governmental building. But the Temple of Apollo is right here. There's a temple to Jupiter right here. These are other Roman political and religious structures. So it's an incredibly important part of town, as well as being an incredibly important geographical spot. So, and all of this, and no one could find it for a while. You'd think it would be easier. So we did find it eventually. So the goals of my team, the Venus Pompeiana Project, started in 2017, ongoing. Our goal was to study and integrate unpublished legacy data from excavations from the early aughts that had been conducted. They did good work. It's just sometimes things happen when you're going to publication and things just don't get published. So we're working with those archaeologists now to kind of combine our conclusions and, you know, put something forth in press. Part of the process to do that involves reopening some of the older trenches, so trenches that were dug by earlier excavations, kind of to reaffirm their conclusions, see if we spot anything they didn't see. But you can't quite just do that, because what happens when you dig a trench, you're going down layer by layer, which shows you layers of activities. But when we then fill it back in, all that dirt is mixed up and you can't really draw any kind of activity conclusions from that hole, that trench. So it's good to dig down and see if we can find any new things like that they missed at the bottom. But we also wanted to look at untouched stratigraphy, so areas that had never been dug and had never been disturbed. So we dug in new spots too, which is good because then we found lots of fun things. So using all this information, the goal was to date the first phase of the Roman temple. So was it built under Sulla? Was it built at a different time? We were trying to figure out when that date was. And the temple, and also the Triporticus, which is like a three-sided, it's not quite a colonnade because there are rooms. It's like three-sided walls with rooms. That's defines the space of the temple. We're trying to figure out the dating of those two structures. And then the other thing we were trying to figure out is, okay, as is accepted wisdom, the Temple of Venus is thought to have been built on an older Samnite religious structure. We wanted to dig down and see if we could confirm that or not. And if we could, well, regardless of what we found, what the dating of those structures are, what's their layout, what's their purpose. So, you know, the question being, would we find a religious structure or would we find something else? And I will be able to tell you that. So, I will say that this material is currently in the process of publication, so I have permission to show you these, but if you can, you know, not redistribute these images, that would be good. I won't get in trouble that way. So on the top, I have various photos of us working. This is on the right here. This is the brick podium. This is the last phase of the temple, the one they were working actively on building when the volcano went off. So in the words of my father when he saw it this summer, there's no building here. I know, it's just a brick core. But we were digging down below the last phase here anyway, so we were looking for older structures, so it's all good. So we had a lovely view. Since, again, this is a cliff, this is a huge valley. You could see, if you were looking a little bit more to the right, you'd be able to see Sorrento from our work spot. That's not ancient. So yeah, we dug next to the podium. We dug a little bit further away near to the east, to the basilica. I'll show you a map in a second. And we also did, you know, documentation and topographic measurements. So these are all to help us, you know, mark where we're finding things specifically. If we ever want to do any kind of like 3D mapping, we can do that. It's just part of the archaeological process to document specifically where you're finding things, because it can help you draw conclusions about the activities. Sometimes we found perfect sized trenches for naps. That's not a grave, despite my colleague Dan taking a nap in it. He's not really taking a nap, but it's a drainage trench. And we were finding all manner of materials. We're finding everything from bronze coins to pieces of amphora with inscriptions in paint or ink written on them that would have been kind of like modern shipping containers where the company name is on there. You do the same thing with your shipping amphoras. Weird pieces of pottery that were incredibly old and should not have been where we found them. I don't know anything more about that at this point. miniature ceramics, which are very common at Pompeii. You find them in religious contexts, you find them in domestic contexts as well. And then, hunks and hunks of wall plaster, which is what I was working with. So finding a whole range of things. And we're also finding, ceramics used for cooking. We're finding other metal things. We're finding all sorts of evidence that's building up to an overall story. So the overall story we were finding, I need to talk slower, sorry. Okay, so things we're finding. So as I said before, this is the area that we were excavating. You can see outlined in red here, these are our various trenches. And what we were doing in particular over the seasons of digging is we were going on the eastern side of the last phase of the podium. So again, this is the thing that's visible there now, the brick core, digging down and going from the podium over to the edge of the space where it meets up with the back wall of the basilica. So we're trying to figure out, more than half of the width of this area, we're trying to see what's going on underneath the soil. And so this is an elevation of what we were finding. So the red and pink are Augustan, so 30s to teens BC. So the period that we were kind of looking for in our excavations. As we dig down, we're starting to see that these are all, in that time period. And then as we go further back in time, we're finding like the blue, which is the Samnite after the 80s BC activities as well. So this is a cross view from the west near the podium. Actually, this includes the podium over to the east near the wall. So it's telling us, what the various time phases of this is. So we start to dig down, and we start finding things that you wouldn't expect to find if you were looking for a Samnite temple. We're finding rooms, we're finding drainage, basins, sidewalks, road levels. And here's another view from another trench of these sort of drainage channels and like street, like pavement levels from a courtyard that date to the late Samnite period. So the 80s BCE and a little after. We're starting to see that it is not, in fact, a temple underneath the Temple of Venus, and there's no Samnite temple under there. Our evidence, in particular, for our conclusions, comes from a cistern, a water tank from one of these spaces that was sealed off. It was filled with dirt at one point and sealed off to level the ground so that the temple, in the first version of the temple, could be built on level ground. And the nice thing about a sealed tank like that is everything within it is, it has a firm end date. It can't have happened after, whatever datable object you can find. That's the latest date. So if you have a coin that's from, the Augustan period and you can't find anything after that, it's probably at the latest, the earliest it could be is the Augustan period, probably not much later because it's a nice sealed container. So those are great when we find them. So we, discovered this, and all these different architectural features come together to tell us that this is a house. It's a series of houses. It's a regular domestic block with streets and drainage and datable to the Augustan period. So again, 30s to late teens. I think we're still finalizing a firm date in there because this is all ongoing work. So that means that, and again, ongoing conclusions, but at this point, we're able to say that contrary to the widely held belief of everybody since we've dug this thing up in the 1890s, this temple in its earliest phase was built under Augustus, so a good 50 or so years after Pompeii became a Roman colony. So it changes up, at least for this part of town, it changes the discussion about how Roman colonialism works at Pompeii. They didn't just come in and establish their own religious building on top of a pre-existing religious building, which again, they have been known to do that elsewhere, but they didn't do that here. There was something, the colony was dedicated to Venus, but for some reason, at least in this particular spot, because I'm not precluding there being, maybe they had an earlier structure somewhere else, we don't know. But at least in this spot, it was 50 years later when they actually decided to build a temple to the patron goddess of the city. So, and in the process of doing that, though, they would have had to have demolished all the houses that were there. And some of the houses, we have plaster chunks from some of those houses, and I've very preliminarily looked at them, and it's very high quality stuff. It's using colors that would have cost a lot. The actual plaster is a very fine finish. It's very nice stuff. So these are not like poor houses that have been demolished for a temple. So but it changes up the discussion. It's like 50 years later, it's an entire generation almost, and a lot of people at Pompeii would have been Romanized at that point. So it adds to our overall discussion of how that works. But what I'm doing, as I said, I briefly mentioned, I was looking at some of that oldest material. The thing that I've been primarily doing the past 3 summers is working on the wall plasters that are coming from those layers that would have been the Augustan period temple. What happened was at some point, this is a personal guess, it's probably related to the earthquake in 62-63 CE. At some point, they decided they wanted to knock down the Augustan temple, which, again, the first temple on that spot. They wanted to knock it down, and then they wanted to expand out to the size where the temple area is as it stands now and build this new, bigger temple that they were in the process of building when it all got buried. So, oops. So, as part of that reconstruction expansion process, they decided that it was just easier to take a chisel to the walls, knock things off in pieces, and then you bury it where it lays and it helps you level the ground. So these particular fragments that we're finding were coming from, sorry, let me back up. Yeah, they're coming from Trench C here, which is, again, near the eastern perimeter of, the last version where they were constructing. So somewhere in here, we can see this line right here, actually, was the boundaries of the Augustan temple, the first temple. It was a slightly smaller. So the plasters are coming from this triporticus that would have surrounded on 3 sides the Augustan temple. So it's not the actual temple itself, the wall paintings, but it's part of that complex. It's still religiously important. They still put a ton of time and money and effort into this. So, and then they just buried it. The nice thing about this is that because they decided to just knock everything off in hunks, when we dug it and we're finding these, leveling layers that are full of various, pieces of ceramic, pieces of wall plaster, just to create an even surface for the construction work, things are fairly close to each other in terms of pieces that actually connect, which is great for my sanity. So you can see here, this is some of the plasters. It was actively coming out of the ground. That's also plaster, it's just upside down, but you can see this just gorgeous red and white and green and mostly black. So my mission has been taking all these pieces, and we have a good dozen boxes of just this part of the wall. We have other pieces of plaster as well, but there's some things like boxes of all white pieces that it's not worth trying to rejoin together because I have a limited amount of sanity, and that would take forever. And there's no decoration on them, so they don't really tell us very much. So this is actually a reconstruction my colleague did in 2020. So the resolution is a little low, but I haven't had time to make my own reconstruction based off of photographs I took this past summer, because I just got back like a week or 2 ago. So his is perfectly fine and it's lovely. You have, this is called, this part of the wall is called the socle. So it's the middle of the wall to the ground. So kind of like modern wainscoting. And, you could almost see these horizontal lines, while they are 2-dimensional, they're that kind of dividing, like, border line between the middle bottom and then the upper part of your wall. So this stuff is incredibly high quality. Again, this picture might be a little better to show you. It's shiny, which means that it has a lot of lime and possibly marble dust in it. So these are very expensive. The pigments are, again, very high quality. They're still brilliantly bright, even 2,000 years later out of the ground. They have, and I didn't include a picture, but we have a few bases of columns here. So there would have been columnar decorations, and we don't have the upper part of the wall very much. We have a couple pieces. Don't know where it went, but it just didn't survive. It happens. So, but you can see this, it's this very delicate, horizontal and vertical lines. These are kind of a bluish color, and there's like yellow scroll work throughout, various geometric designs and shapes. And again, this is all very, very nice stuff. Also very heavy, but that's unrelated. It's just, flashbacks. So the nice thing about having so much of at least the bottom part of this wall is that we're able to find comparanda. We're able to find comparisons that exist elsewhere in the region of Campania around Mount Vesuvius. So this is actually a reproduction someone did of a wall from a villa called the Villa of Agrippa Posthumus, which is very close to Mount Vesuvius. It's just a farm villa, but it belonged to the imperial family. So Augustus is the right time period. It's since been reburied by an earthquake an eruption in 1906. So we only have a few rooms of it. But if you're ever at the Met in New York, they have some of these walls. So great to go to them. But the important part of this is the bottom here, the socle of this wall from the Villa of Agrippa Posthumus, it's not identical. And we're not really looking for identical, but there's a lot of elements here. Like we have this kind of a diamond. We have this kind of a square. You can see square. Diamond isn't actually in here, but we do have something that looks like that. We have these columns. This is the kind of thing we're looking for when we're trying to understand how a wall decoration looks like, and also for dating purposes. So we have enough elements of this wall between what I've shown you and then what I have that I need to integrate still, that we are able to say that this is definitely a similar design to this wall of Agrippa Posthumus's villa, and those date to the Augustan period. So what this means is it basically, it's supporting evidence for our conclusions that the version of the temple, the first version that we found, is probably, it belongs to the Augustan period when it was built. It wasn't built in the 80s. It was built more like in the 30s, or between the 30s and the teens. This is only one piece of a larger puzzle. As with anything, archaeology has to use a bunch of different kinds of evidence all combined together to draw these conclusions. So it's not just the wall fragments, although I would love to say it's just because of the wall fragments that we figured this out. But no, it's the structures that we found while digging, it's ceramic evidence, it's coins, it's all sorts of things. But it does help us kind of rebuild this picture and disprove a widely held belief about this temple and change up entirely how we're thinking about colonialism in Pompeii at that point in time, at least when it comes to the Temple of Venus in that particular spot. So, I talked fast, I'm sorry. So that is kind of the end of my presentation. I do want to thank the Archaeological Park of Pompeii, the directors there, and also our various funders. So that's what I got. Are there any questions at all? Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. So the question was, since the Samnites are the original colonists of Campania, are we finding ruins? Yeah, actually, what we found. Let me back up. Sorry. So one thing with this, I can't back up. So all these street ruins we're finding, this evidence of rooms and housing, that's Samnite. Those are Samnite houses, yes. We haven't really found anything original Greek, but we have we've also not dug fully down to the natural soil, so the untouched levels of dirt where human activity has never happened. We haven't gone that far deep, because our main research question is what's going on with the first version of the Temple of Venus? When was it built? So I would love to continue doing work on these houses, though. It's also a little challenging at Pompeii um, because it's, you know, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and people come to see Pompeii as it is, you know, now with just the houses as they stand in 79 CE when it was buried. Work below that, further back in time, the deeper we dig, the further back in time we get. Work below that is kind of, it's in like smaller spots, smaller trenches, so we don't, because you can't really like destroy buildings that exist. So it's very targeted. I know in terms of, sorry, the triangular form over here is where a lot of the Greek first settlement stuff is happening. I don't know. We've yet to find evidence for anything like that over here, but I mean, I can't preclude it, but at least it wasn't what we were finding. We were just happy to find that, oh no, it was just Samnite housing that eventually got knocked down, which is still colonialism, but 50 years later. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The local museum there at Pompeii, or would one need to go to Naples to see the artifact?
So Pompeii itself is actually considered to be a museum. It's the archaeological park of Pompeii. So you can go there and see, you know, all the wall paintings that still exist in houses that are open. They have a small, actually, it's right here. It's a very small museum called the Antiquarium. It has a limited collection of things, but a lot of the really nice materials are in Naples. The museum is called the MAN, the Museo Archeologico Nazionale de Napoli. It's the Naples, the National Museum of Archaeology in Naples. So what happened with early excavations of Pompeii, they were basically on a treasure hunt. So the Bourbon kings sponsored these digs. All the nice things that they found were brought back to Naples and put in the royals' private collections, including, you know, cut out pieces of wall plasters and things. But and then not too long, you know, not terribly long after they started doing that, they decided to make it a public museum so the public could come. So I'm of two minds on that, because on the one hand, I hate that they destroyed things and took them out of context, because if something's removed from where it was found, we can't use it to figure out what was going on in the space. But a lot of the buildings in Pompeii have been left to the elements, because earlier excavations, they just focused on uncovering as much as they could, and they didn't care about preserving things. When you expose wall plaster to rain and sun, it eventually just melts away and crumbles. So there's a lot that's gone. So at least there's stuff in Naples too. But yeah, yes, and is the answer to that. Yes, sir.
What percent of Pompeii and Herculaneum have been excavated?
Yeah, so it's, I think the last estimate I heard with Pompeii was about 2/3, so 60 something percent. Trying to back up, sorry. Thing doesn't back up easily. Yeah, so a lot of this has been excavated, not so much some of this. This is actually where my lab building is when I work on site. There's like a, you know, not open to the public area where we have storage and we work on our materials. So that's all unexcavated. All of these areas are pretty much unexcavated. Region 9 here, Region 9 is where the excavations, you've been seeing Pompeii in the news in the past year or so, all these various, you know, the pizza thing last year, this blue room, the bakery, that's all happening in the same house over in Region 9 where they're digging it up. So there's about, I think, 1/3 of it left to be uncovered at Pompeii. Herculaneum is a totally different animal, because Herculaneum was buried much, much deeper. It's more like 60 feet under ash and lava and pumice. So it's very deep, very hard to excavate. And there's the modern town of Ercolano on top of it. So unlike Pompeii, where there wasn't really stuff built on top, it was a farm field. Herculaneum is under, you know, actual civic. It's under a town. So it's not really likely they're going to excavate much more of Herculaneum, at least at present. because it would be exorbitantly expensive and a massive headache for the Italian government to okay that. But I do recommend, if you ever get a chance to go to this area, to make sure you have time to go to Herculaneum, because Herculaneum is actually, because it was buried so deep and so quickly, it was much better preserved than Pompeii. So there's a lot of very beautiful wall paintings. There's things like carbonized wood where the gases from the eruption were so hot it just fried all the wood. So you can see things that don't survive at Pompeii very much. So definitely worth a trip too. And you can see it all in one day, whereas Pompeii, you need a little more time. So yes. And a part of the reason also that there's sections of Pompeii that are unexcavated, it's a combination of things. Part of it is because so much of the town was excavated with no care to focus on conservation afterwards. The current director of the park is more focused on actively conserving things that are already excavated or have been left to the elements, as opposed to uncovering new things, because, you know, it's not a small area. They have, you know, so much time and effort and budget. And also because as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, there's some thought that we should leave things for future generations of archaeologists to take a crack at as well. It's their, you know, cultural world heritage too. So, any other questions? I can't see if there's anything happening on Zoom. Sorry. Nope, nothing happening on Zoom. Does anybody have any other questions at all? Yes, sir.
Still pretty active. How does that affect your work?
It doesn't particularly affect my work. I actually climbed the volcano with my father at the beginning of July. That was fun. It's not dormant, but it hasn't had a full-scale eruption in, I think, at least 50, 60 years, at least. The last big one, I think, was 1906. It is due up, but I mean, it's not really a day-to-day concern. There's a subterranean volcano region over here between Naples and Puteoli that's been a little bit more active recently, and that's resulted in some like magnitude 3 earthquakes. Like, you probably don't even feel them, if you feel them at all. So I think the general understanding I get from the locals, and I tend to subscribe to it, is if it goes off, it goes off. We can't do anything about it, but why worry about it? It's just there. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. If it goes, it goes. So, but I mean, the Italian government keeps a very close eye on it, because this bay is actually also the most populous part of Italy, like per capita. It's the most people here. So they keep an eye on it, but it doesn't affect our work on a day-to-day. So, any other questions? Like I said, I know I talked really fast. I tend to do that. Okay. Yeah.
Again, we would like to thank Brittany for traveling to Eastern North Carolina today and giving such a wonderful history for lunch for us. And you can tell Brittany is excited about her work. And I think that's the best
really fast.
Because to enjoy your job, you got to love your job, and you can tell Brittany very much enjoys it. So, and we wish her all the luck in earning her PhD, because I think that's what you're going to be working on this school year.
Yeah, I need to write it.
So we wish you the best of luck, and we thank you and your mom for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.